Hey, Patrick Pandora here. You might have saw my last video where I broke down the data on the number of Canadians moving to the United States, and the CBC reported 126,000 Canadians made the move, all-time record, or I should say 10-year high. And I wanted to, not just go through the data, but why are they moving? I've been helping Canadians move to the US for the past 12 years. I've spoken to thousands of Canadians that have made the move or contemplated the move. And I want to go through in today's video the 6 reasons that are most current why they're moving, why Canadians are making the move to the US, and not the BS reasons like healthcare, because US healthcare is not perfect. And I don't know if Canadians better or US healthcare is better. Depends what you prioritize, depends on your individual and family situation. One's free where you pay higher taxes, and one you could get mystery billing. There's other, reasons, but I don't find them, 100% credible why Canadians are making the move. People move for all different reasons, and there's some reasons not on this list that are the most important, probably like love, family. Those are top reasons that we go through, but these 6 reasons are pretty much across the board for our Canadian clients. And it's why in the last video, again, 10 times when you look at the proportion of Canadians live in the US compared to Americans living in Canada, with 2.5% of Canadians living in the United States. And I could see that going up to 5% easy in the next 10, 20 years, where Americans living in Canada's 0.25%. 0.25% of Americans live in Canada. So it's a fraction when you look at the proportions. And these 6 reasons will detail why it is a fraction and why Americans aren't making the move up north. Number 1 reason I found was housing. And when I was going through the data, I was shocked because I had heard people complain about the housing, and I saw online, how much it costs to buy a home in Toronto, buy a home in Montreal, Vancouver. But I was going through RBC, Royal Bank of Canada, as well as the National Bank of Canada, their most recent housing affordability report, Q4 2025. And Toronto homeowners spend 69.8% of median household income on mortgage payments alone. And that's just mortgage payments. There's already other costs. So I don't know if it's 74% of their median, the median family income is going to, basically housing costs, with mortgages being, the highest of that. And then, against it's the long term, it's been better and it's trending down a little, but still even long term is 54.2%. So today's buyers are burdened with a lot more compared to in the past. And Vancouver is even worse at 85% of percentage of family income going to the mortgage payments. So that blows me away. It's before taxes, insurance, food, childcare, other necessities. And there are some cities that are better, which we'll go through. And you might even be surprised if you're Canadian watching this. But median home pricing in Toronto is over $1 million, almost 1.1 million. Vancouver median home price $1.2 million, and it's just nuts in terms of the percentage. And if you compare it to like a Chicago, where people earn even more than Toronto, and the house prices are less, or even Dallas, where they earn the same as Toronto, 63,000 American dollars median income for a family, but the Dallas home price is less than half at $393,000. So same salary, fraction of the mortgage that you're paying. It's a no-brainer. I see it as a no-brainer if you have flexibility and maybe you don't have family even in Toronto to make that move down to Texas or another U.S. state. Canada has no second global city or even really prominent city when you look at compared to the US, where US has New York, Chicago, Boston, Los Angeles, Dallas, Atlanta, Miami, Houston, Seattle. these are regional cities, but they're also global cities in their own right. So, if San Fran for an American prices you out and say you're not hitting, we'll go through the salary numbers of what people are actually earning in San Francisco. But say if you're not quite making it, you can always move to Denver or Salt Lake City, easily visit your family, jump on a cheap flight, lower cost of living. Canada doesn't really have that escape valve, and there's no city that is that you can largely keep that Toronto salary, but move to some other Canadian city. And from what I've heard, remote work has grown a lot in Canada, but you got to decide, where you want to actually be living. Is there a place in Canada that you're really pumped about that you want to be living? And then, I don't want to get too political on this, and whether you hate Trump or love Trump, if Canada was the 51st state, Toronto would lose like 50% plus of its population over the years after the integration to the United States. We saw that with Buffalo, Cleveland, where peak population just went way down and people moved to the Sun Belt, the Carolinas, Florida, Arizona, Texas. Canada doesn't have that. So there's been a lot of internal migration within the United States. If all Canadians were American citizens tomorrow, over the coming decade, there would be a lot of movement. I would bet, a lot of money on that. So reason number 2 I want to go through is the career opportunities. The U.S. market's 13 times the size of Canada. Canada would, could be a state like California, Texas, when you look at the total economic size. According to levels.fyi, a software engineer in Toronto is making about 100,000 American dollars, 138,000 Canadian. You look at Raleigh area and they're making $140,000. So more. Houston, 132,000, and then San Fran takes the cake, 2.7 times more, $272,000 as a software engineer in San Fran. So making a lot more money in these cities. Cost of living is going to be lower in Raleigh. Cost of living is going to be lower in Houston. The product manager is another role. A lot of our clients are coming as business owners, bringing a business from Canada, starting an independent business, even buying a franchise. And then the spouse is also going to work, oftentimes in tech, but it could be in a different role, business development, sales. I just chose these 2 as we've had a lot of clients where the spouse works as a product manager or works as a software engineer. So product manager in Toronto, 74,000 American dollars. According to Glassdoor, over 4,100 salaries analyzed. So you're making 103,000 or so in Toronto. In Raleigh, you're doing double, 148,000. Houston, 172,000, especially because of that booming energy market. And then San Fran, $307,000, with Meta people regularly making $550,000. So it's night and day. You're making generally across the board a lot more money in the United States. It is more of an aggressive work environment. You can expect to work more hours and be pushed, probably less vacation time. You can also expect to have a lot more equity upside and get stock options in the companies if you're being employed. And then also on the franchise side, I've talked to Dairy Queen franchisees. One in particular had multiple locations in Canada, and the US locations are doing double the income. So if you just look at small businesses, we're going through some jobs. It's an easy proxy, a lot more data. But in Canada, a small business owner isn't making as much. And if you're looking to buy a small business, I heard the valuations are crazy just to get in. Where there's a lot more immigrants looking to buy these small businesses in Canada for the amount of supply there are. And it seems like the multiple on what the business owner is making. So if you're making $100,000 as a business owner in Canada, you could sell that for $400K, $500K, where in the US, maybe it's half that. So business owners are across the board, making more money, just, regardless of what industry you're in. Maybe oil and gas, if you're in one of those niche sites, well north in Alberta. But generally, as a business owner in the United States, you're making a lot more money. So dual income earner, imagine you're making as a business owner after 3 years, well stabilized, 150K in Raleigh. Your spouse is making 150K, 300K total. It's pretty damn good. San Fran, business owner making more, your spouse is making more as an employee, 500K. People complain about San Fran that it's expensive, but a couple earning $500,000, I don't care where you live in the world, you can probably get by quite fine. Number 3 reason I hear is taxes. It took, I heard people talking about it, and there'd be numbers thrown around, but I recently went through and to really just understand for myself, how much higher the taxes. So I want to go through the income tax on the federal, provincial level, or in the United States, the federal and then the state level. But first, just the basic sales tax is higher, where in Florida, could be 7%, Texas similar. Many of the provinces you're paying 13%, even more when you go to a restaurant. So nearly double in terms of consumption tax. And then when you're providing a service to someone, like I had a client, IT services, and he had to invoice what you call, let me look it up, it's the GST or HST, and it was 15%. So 15% off the top, and then he was earning a lot of money. So the marginal rate for many of these, depending where you live in, Ontario 53.5%, British Columbia similar, Quebec 53%, Nova Scotia 54%. I think his effective rate was 45%. But you add that top 15% tax, and then 45% tax on earnings, and then he's paying taxes anywhere he goes. And then there's taxes, that also drive the housing costs, where you're paying the local municipality, the developers paying tons of money in taxes for the right to develop a property in Ontario, in the Greater Toronto area. So there's just so many taxes at every level. And I guess I'd be fine with paying high taxes if there's a return there, where I see the return in Canada being in healthcare, but I don't see it for retirement. In the US, you're making $3K, $4K from the US government if you were highly paid the majority of your career. I don't see where the return is. Schools, the student-teacher ratio is worse across the board in Canada compared to the US. So I don't see the return on the taxes besides the healthcare, which I think is a great thing that Canada has, universal healthcare. I'm a fan of that. I think in the US it will eventually be there, but it's hard to implement as every state's very different, and politics included too. So Florida and Texas, there's no state income tax. So if you're a family making $250K American, you're probably paying about 22%. So you have 2 kids after deductions and everything. So that is what, $50K, $55,000 in taxes to the federal government. There's no state taxes. Where in Canada, depending on what province you're living in, it would be double that. North Carolina, flat income tax, 4.25%. A lot of our clients are moving to the Carolinas. That's reasonable. Is it going to change your life so much? That 4% tax? Probably not, especially because cost of living is lower in a lot of the cities and towns in North Carolina compared to Florida at the moment. So I guess that's a big thing. Where in Canada, it's just hitting you at every level. When you think you're done, you're getting hit with another tax. And growing up in Canada, you probably think that's normal, but me growing up in the United States, that's not normal. And you expect to really, all right, pay the income tax and then pay the sales tax, but that's pretty much it. Reason number 4, our clients are moving from Canada to the United States is the weather. And I'm filming this March 2026. We usually get a bit of an uptick and reach out from Canada, especially depending on how bad the winter was. I know I was looking at one day, Toronto is negative 30 Celsius, and Raleigh, North Carolina, the same day was like 10 degrees Celsius. So massive difference, 40 degrees Celsius. Toronto sits the same latitude and climate zone as Detroit, Buffalo. These are cities that have lost nearly half their population to the Sun Belt. People have made the migration down south to warmer cities, more temperate climates. So if Canada was a 51st state, I don't think it's gonna become. We'll see with Alberta maybe breaking off or being their own independent country. People would leave Toronto. People are in Toronto because it is the Canadian city. But if you don't have to be there, you might move to Chicago to stay, relatively close, or Buffalo even, or make the move to Florida or somewhere else. If you compare, cost of living in Buffalo compared to Toronto, it's night and day. And one's just that way because it's Canada. And it's difficult to build homes and supply, et cetera. But I don't want to get off topic. Going back to the weather, all these cities, Cleveland, 58%, Pittsburgh, 55% of the population in Buffalo. And where did people go? They went to the Carolinas, Florida, Texas. They've had a huge inbound. So Toronto, just like looking at the sunlight, gets about 2,000 hours of sunshine per year. Miami averages 3,200, as does much of Florida. So that gap is pretty big, about 1,100 hours of sunshine annually. It's not trivial. And as for me, and probably for you, sunshine does affect my mood, energy, sleep quality, even mental health is affected by sunlight. And the weather, there are nice places, I guess, more temperate places on the west coast of Canada. And I mentioned, if I lived in Canada, I speak some French. I would consider Montreal, Quebec, but I lived in Maine, and it's just so damn frigid. It's that humid cold where I'd probably prefer Calgary or parts of British Columbia that are much drier cold. And also I enjoy, the outdoors. I enjoy skiing. So the Canadian winters for me, I've been to Quebec City many times in the winter, Toronto, it's just kind of brutal, and the mood of people is a lot different than in the summer months or even than in the autumn. So weather's a big thing and a big reason why our Canadian clients are making the move to especially southern cities in the US. Number 5 reason is remote work. So remote work changed everything in COVID. You no longer need to be spending the winters in Canada. You could spend just the summers, 3 months a year in Toronto, 2 months a year in Toronto, 1 month in Canada. A lot of our Canadian clients are doing this. I saw this in Miami, the influx of Canadians that started spending some time kind of dipping their toes in the US because the remote work was astonishing. So remote work has changed, whether you own a business in Canada that you can run remote, whether you're employed at a Canadian company, maybe you provide a service to a Canadian company. A lot of Canadians, initially started in a lot of time in Mexico, Costa Rica, all amazing places, but might have struggled with the language or, preferred more the Anglo school culture. And we've seen a lot more people spending significant time in the US because of remote work. And now you got to be careful about this. You can't technically be working, or most of what you do for work would be illegal if you just come on your visa-free status with your Canadian passport. If you're providing consulting work for a Canadian company, you might need to have a E1 visa, especially if it's significant trade. You're billing 20K plus. Maybe you have some people under you, that could potentially work for an E1 visa. Maybe you invest, there's some investment you could do in the US and get an E2 visa, O1 top talent visa. So there are options available if you're doing remote work from Canada and the US. But I saw a lot of people kind of got their feet wet, spending a couple of weeks, month, 2 months living in the United States, and since have decided to uproot their families and enroll their kids in school. And many Canadians were spending a couple months in Florida in the winters, and now it's just the inverse. It's 10 months in Florida and 2 months in Canada. get the best of both worlds, escape the heat that can be brutal, especially in South Florida in the summer. And then you don't have to spend the winter again in Canada. So remote work has really changed. And the nice thing with remote work, if you do it right, you can come in, you keep your income, whether it's a business income from Canada, your consulting contracts from Canada, and then little by little, like I use in that software developer example, that product manager example, you start making American dollars and you start billing American clients. You start working for an American company, or your spouse starts working for an American company. So there are amazing benefits to remote work. If you want to explore visa options, shoot me an email at patrick@visafranchise.com. And let's go through the reason number 6. It's just entrepreneurship. It's easier in the United States. It's really competitive, much more competitive than Canada. Canada protects their industries. How many American financial firms do you see in Canada? You just see Canadian banks. It's like that for a reason. It's really strict. It's not free access to the Canadian market. So US is pretty open to play. Companies can come there, invest, sell there. They make it easy. And then just getting set up is really easy. Delaware LLC, Wyoming LLC, we're talking about hours, days to open, fees, filing fees, $100, $200 to get the business open. To close it's very easy, straightforward. Access to capital. So there's a lot of hype in Canada, incubator, startup accelerator, et cetera, but they don't get nearly as much investment as their US equivalent. So US venture capital is about 20 times Canada at every stage. It's significantly larger. If you look at, different loan programs, like we have the SBA loan programs, government-backed loans, you can buy an existing business, you can start a business, buy a franchise. And once you become a US citizen, if you want to go down that path, you could put 10% cash down, get a 90% loan. And there are also banks that will offer that outside the SBA program, especially franchise financing when you're doing acquisitions in the franchise space. But you can't just parachute down to Canada. You got to build some track record. Maybe that's a separate video. But as an entrepreneur in the U.S. market, there's nothing like it. It's vibrant. There are a lot of people, a lot more business owners. Business ownership in Canada is going down, especially when you look at actual, I don't want to say actual business owners, but I see you have freelancers, someone that's a one-man show, provides a service to a company, and then you have a business owner that has employees. And that's really fallen down in Canada, where there's a lot less small business owners for different reasons. I mentioned the taxes that can be suffocating. Where there's a lot more business owners every year in the United States that are employing Americans, employing foreigners working in the United States. And the market side's not nuts. Canada, you're selling to 40 million people, in the United States, 330 million people. So the numbers are night and day. And if you're doing B2B, business to business, there's just a lot more enterprises that you could be selling to. And then the no HST is important. You're running a service business, invoicing or basically acting as a tax collector for the government. 13% here, 15% there. Say you're billing $500,000. That's a lot of money, $30,000 that you don't have to have your client pay. And maybe you can negotiate down pricing and benefits, whatever, pass on a little discount and you keep the rest as you're working in the United States and you're servicing a Canadian client. So I'm not an accountant. Don't take this as tax advice, but I think just the simple fact of moving to the United States and continuing to service your Canadian clients, you save tremendously in terms of taxes. So entrepreneurship in the United States, there's nothing like it. It is super competitive though. So bring your A game. It is difficult. There's an onboarding ramp. And we've seen this for our business, our entrepreneur clients, especially those that aren't already selling to the US market. Cause we do have some clients that already 50, 70% of their revenue is based from American US customers, and then they make the move, to further grow the business from $1 million in revenue in the US to $2 million in revenue in the US. So that's another story. So again, the last video, I went through all the data on the number of Canadians living in the United States, and it's at least 10 times the number, proportion of Americans living in Canada. 2.5% of the Canadian population, Canadians live in the United States, where it's 0.25% of Americans living in Canada. So it's a very one-sided trade. I don't mean to do this video, to bash on Canada. I love Canada. I love visiting there. I've been to Quebec City, Montreal, Toronto, Calgary, many ski trips to Canada. It's a beautiful country, but I do like taking the plane to go skiing, or taking the plane to Montreal, spend a week, and then come back to sunny Florida. So if any of these reasons resonated with you, let me know. What's your number one reason that you are thinking about making the move to the United States, or maybe you've already made the move to the United States? I want to hear it. Even like some feedback. I mentioned the healthcare. I want to know from you, like, what is the return if you're paying $50K in taxes in Canada? What do you get back from that? Do you get, enhanced security compared to the United States, just better healthcare benefits? What do you get for your hard-earned money when you're paying taxes in Canada versus the US? I appreciate your time, and thanks for staying till then.